In this video, I'm going to discuss Dave Rubin and his shift in religious thinking. We're going to have a look at what cultural Christianity is. We're going to explore Dave's religious illiteracy, the emptiness of his supposed conversion, why I think he is a reactionary, and finally why his individualism is diametrically opposed to his newly adopted religious views. But first, let's have a quick overview of his political awakening. I have watched a lot of Dave Rubin content over the years. While I have never called myself a fan, I was sympathetic to Dave and his show, The Rubin Report. It was a nice change of pace compared to, say, The Young Turks. There were no blatant misrepresentations, no smug and condescending hosts, and no partisan hackery. But it wasn't to last. Over the years, The Rubin Report kept growing and growing, and with his growth, his politics started to shift. He calls it his political awakening, and he has shifted on economics, policy, education, gun control, social justice, and as we shall see, religion. But before we take a deep dive into Rubin's conversion, let's have a look at some of the wacky things he has said and establish the indisputable fact that Rubin is not a man of great substance. There was the infamous Joe Rogan podcast about building codes and regulations. Joe Rogan hasn't invited him back to the podcast since. Then there was a David Pacman interview where he discussed healthcare without really knowing what he was talking about. Then he said that people like Stefan Molyneux and Milo Yiannopoulos were in this exciting new center. That didn't age too well. Or when he said that he liked Brazilian President Bolsonaro because he is pushing back against the SJW nonsense, ignoring or not knowing the fact that Bolsonaro is a notorious and open homophobe who wouldn't want to live next to a gay couple and who advocates beating your child if he comes out as gay. Real insightful stuff from Dave. And of course his book, which the Spectator USA, not necessarily a left-wing publication, described as extremely lazy, bearing all the hallmarks of a project that was knocked together over a few wet weekends. In it, he writes some silly and flat-out false things. He thinks the Ukraine is part of NATO, which it is not. I wouldn't blame anyone, especially a non-European, who doesn't know this. But Dave is a political pundit, and if you choose to write about something, at least research it. He also writes that Hitler was an art-loving vegetarian lefty and that Nazis are actually left-wing because it's an acronym for National Socialist. Again, great stuff. And for all his hatred and disdain for identity politics, he just keeps going on about his sexuality.
I don't mention that I'm gay that often. I happen to be gay, big damn deal. They know I'm married to a man.
You're openly gay, you're married to a dude.
Yeah.
Like how exactly, how
I'm
does this
not
work?
just saying it, I put it into
Right,
practice
exactly.
in real life.
I mean,
I'm
because-
pretty gay, man. I don't want to make you blush right now, but I assure you that I'm gay. There I talked about being gay, married, and
Exactly.
Ben,
So-
don't sleep with a dude.
Done.
Two gay people. It's like I tell my husband I'm homophobic. He's confused. He's
Of course.
on tour with a gay guy. A gay married guy. I'm gay, big damn whoopee. This is the gayest thing I'm going to do all month. I'm gay again. Like two gay guys getting drunk and having sex.
Yes, I've heard
Plenty
that
of
happens.
that. That's happened a lot. I'm gay married. I even married a dude. I mean, that's, yeah, I'm gay. Okay. Zippity damn dude. I'm only gay after 10. It's all right. One of the girls kept calling me a homophobe, which my husband has no idea. I'm gay married. I mean,
Yes, Dave, we know. So with all this out of the way, let's get into the meat of this video.
It's of a merchant's daughter brought up in Callio. Rob me other girls who'd let me go. She took me in the parlor.
On the 31st of July this year, British radio host Justin Brierley uploaded a video titled How New Atheism Got Old. Culture is looking for new meaning again. He goes on to explain that he thinks the new atheism, that's the atheism of Hitchens, Dawkins and Harris, which he calls a more evangelistic or even dogmatic form of atheism, is on its way out.
And so I think the real problem with the new atheism was that it tore religion down but didn't give people a narrative, a meaning, to actually live their lives into. And when that happens, when you simply tear away the foundations, people go off in all kinds of interesting and strange directions very often. I think we're living right now in a meaning crisis, both in the UK and worldwide.
Without a religious foundation, we have found ourselves in a meaning crisis, which New Atheism failed to answer. In its place has come something new. Figures like Jordan Peterson, Douglas Murray, or author Tom Holland, no, not Spider-Man, who aren't believers in the traditional sense of the word, have tried to make meaning of this crisis of meaninglessness. When I say that they aren't believers in the traditional sense of the word, I mean that they aren't Christians that believe in the Creator God of the Old and New Testament.
So people often ask me, do you believe in God? Which I don't like that question. First of all, it's an attempt to box me in a sense. And the reason that it's an attempt to box me in is because the question is asked so that I can be firmly placed on one side of a binary argument. And the reason I don't like to answer it is because A, I don't like to be boxed in, and B, because I don't know what the person means by believe or God. And they think they know. And the probability that they construe belief and construe God the same way I do is virtually zero. So it's a question that doesn't work for me on multiple levels of analysis. But
recently, you said that your study of the Quran, you said this in print, made you an atheist.
That's right. I said Muhammad made me an atheist. The publisher said at the time, that's a pretty provocative headline. I said, well, get somebody to do the next one. She said, I could find a Catholic who could say Muhammad made me a Catholic. I said, how about trying to make it a 3-part article and get the third one, somebody saying Muhammad made me a Jew?
You started on a journey writing this book. Did you become more religious writing it and discovering these
things? The more I wrote it, the more culturally Christian I came to feel. And the more conscious I became of the kind of essentially anemic base of things that I believe in. So the more I wrote it, the more I realized that human rights don't exist outside the framework of a theological structure. I mean, they just don't exist. And so the more I came to want to believe, I suppose.
So Peterson, Murray and Holland don't believe in the same way that your evangelical next-door neighbor would, but they do share a sense of respect for the Christian faith. People like this, who don't believe but believe in belief, are called cultural Christians. I think Douglas Murray has a nice way of expressing this point of view in the following clip.
Things that Douglas, who's claimed upon multiple occasions to be an atheist, and I don't know how he's feeling about that at the present time. But it doesn't matter. One of the things Douglas has pointed out was that there are things that we've done in free countries, let's say broadly speaking in the West, that are worth protecting, and that in order to protect them in the longest sense, it's conceivable that we need a cognitive structure, something like that, that can act as a bulwark against those forces that would seek to undermine and destroy it. And Douglas has been driven, I would say, to some degree, to hypothesize that for Christianity, for all its faults, or we could say Judeo-Christianity to broaden it, for all its faults, might provide something approximating that bulwark if we could only figure out how to utilize it properly. So,
yes. I mean, one of my problems on this is that it seems that we are where we are with belief, whether we wish it to be or not. We cannot believe as our predecessors believed, even if we wanted to. We know too much more now, and it puts us in this very difficult position. But to denude ourselves of the entire story seems to me to be a fool's errand, for a set of reasons. One of which is that from a lot of travel, a lot of speaking to people from all around the world, it doesn't seem at all obvious to me that what we have in countries like this one is the default position of human beings. In fact, it strikes me as being very rare. Order, even political order, political liberalism, political freedom, very, very unusual things. And if you like the things that helped to get you there, with all of the caveats we could throw in all evening. And it's not the only thing that got us there, obviously. But that if you like, broadly speaking, where we are, you've got to be very suspicious at the very least of saying, the whole story's no good, we don't need the story, we can move on.
So here's the thing. I don't agree with this perspective at all. I don't think Christianity is some bulwark against certain destruction. I don't think Christianity is the foundation of all the values and institutions that we hold dear. I actually think it has been quite a harming and harassing presence in our history. And even today it certainly isn't harmless. This doesn't mean I want to throw it all away, but we should look at it critically and point out when and where it's going wrong. But while I disagree with these guys, I can respect where they come from. They're serious authors and academics. They've studied the subject and come to their own conclusions. Tom Holland, for example, wrote a 600-page book about how Christianity has shaped the West. Douglas Murray published his first book when he was 19 and traveled the world to research his other works. A lot of people don't like him, but you can't say Jordan Peterson has no idea what he's talking about. The same, however, cannot be said about everyone's favorite classical liberal, Dave Rubin. I think by now we can safely say that Dave Rubin isn't necessarily a man of great depth.
Lefties are all the racists, blah, blah, blah. Lefty, liberal, blah, blah, blah. And blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And blah, blah, blah. If blah, 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 or blah, blah, blah should, blah, blah, blah. Or blah, blah, blah. And da.
No, but seriously, Rubin is not an impressive thinker. All he ever talks about is how the left is no longer liberal and why the right is actually more tolerant now. The man is a broken record and a meme at this point. His book got scathing reviews and even right-leaning publications like The Spectator and Business Insider didn't like it. But if you thought his takes on politics were bad, his views on religion are even worse. For example, he has famously said that Jesus was probably around a lot of Muslims.
Gay people and Muslims and the way they feel about those two groups, I still think is mostly Jesus' fault.
So that's Jesus right there. Even though Jesus probably would have been okay
loved
with
them
gay
both,
people
right.
and Muslims. And
well, that's
he was
the thing.
around a lot of Muslims. It was the Middle East.
Yeah, Muhammad was born in 571 and Islam was founded in 622, when Muhammad made his journey from Mecca to Medina. That's a difference of more than 600 years. This is what you might call
not a trivial error.
And in this interview with Christian apologist Rafi Zacharias, he mistakes the word apologist to mean something completely different.
All right. So first, when I Google your name, it says that you're a Christian apologist. Now, we all hear this phrase, and it sounds a little strange to me. Christian apologist, as if to do what you do, you have to either apologize for something or feel guilty about it or something like that. Can you tell me about the phrase Christian apologist?
This is weird. Does he really not know the word apologist? Apologetics comes from the Greek apologia and simply means to speak in defense of. But Rubin somehow thinks it's a term of abuse. It shows his lack of religious knowledge, if you ask me. So with his religious illiteracy in mind, let's have a look at Rubin's own religious evolution. When he was still at TYT, and even in the early days of the Rubin Report, Rubin called himself an atheist. After a while, however, he began to feel uneasy with that label and has gradually shifted to a more Peterson-esque position on religion. This is what he sounded like back in 2016.
God, Jesus, Voldemort, Optimus Prime, Kylo Ren, Falcor, Donald Trump. What do they all have in common? Well, they're all characters humans created to tell stories and to answer big questions. Whether you believe these characters are real or not is up to you. This is exactly what having a belief means. There is no more evidence that God exists or that Jesus was his son than there is that Optimus Prime was a real talking, transforming robot, or that Falkor helped Atreyu stop the nothing in the never-ending story. This brings me to atheism. The best definition I've found for atheism is it is not a denial of gods, it is a lack of belief in gods. This is an incredibly important distinction to make. An atheist isn't denying that a god or gods exist. An atheist is just asking for evidence of such an incredible claim.
And here he is, answering a question at Oxford Union in 2018 about what he thinks of religion.
I'm glad you asked that question because I don't talk about this that often. I've talked about it a little bit with Shapiro and I think maybe with Sam Harris. In terms of my own belief on belief, I've tried hard my entire life to believe in something that I can't prove. I've tried. I mean, I went to Mount Sinai in Egypt where they tell you that that's where Moses got the 10 Commandments. And I was your age. I was early 20s when your mind is open and ready. I was ready for a religious experience. And I went up there with the intentions of having some sort of religious experience. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen.
So it's very clear from these clips that he does not believe. I don't really know what he means when he said he tried to, but it just isn't working for him. It's interesting though that he follows it up with this.
For a while, I did say I was an atheist. And the more I said it, I realized that I didn't like saying it. Really, that's what happened. And I believe in something that I can't quite explain.
That's quite a shift. While not believing, he doesn't like calling himself an atheist. I wonder why. But it gets better. This is him 1 year later at a Christian event.
That being said, as I said, I went to this Yom Kippur service that Dennis Prager hosted, and I found it incredibly moving. And Dennis gave a sermon that he talked all about Judeo-Christian values and sort of what's happening in our country right now and how it all seems to be becoming untethered. And he used some religious backing to give some value there. And I thought, well, this is value. This is something, a real world way that I could come somewhere once a week or build some community around or friends that would have value.
Do you believe in God? Do you feel like that's where you've got to at this point in your life?
So I think I would answer it. I mean, I would answer it in a similar way that Jordan would. That, look, I think I've sort of laid out a set of beliefs here that show the utility of believing in something outside of myself, and I do believe in that. So if you want to call that God, that there is something outside of me, there is something that is connecting all of us that has nothing to do with the material world. There is something that drives us, that is the driver of humanity, that is something good. I believe that. I believe that.
But could you put a name on that something at this point? I told you I wanted to label you before the end of the evening.
Jesus?
He is so uncomfortable with that question, and he basically gets pressured into saying he believes in Jesus now. So this guy went from an avowed and open atheist to a semi-believing cultural Christian in just a short few years. What happened? To answer that, let's place Rubin's conversion in a broader context. When many of the anti-SJW YouTube skeptics started leaning more and more right in the ongoing culture war, Rubin joined. Take Sargon, for example. He used to call himself a liberal, but now goes with the label English liberal. But labels like that don't really mean anything when you join UKIP and literally destroy the party single-handedly. Rubin, while still calling himself a classical liberal, has finally admitted to being a conservative and is planning to vote for Trump in the upcoming elections.
Again, I don't have Trump derangement syndrome. I'm most likely voting for Trump. I actually see no way around it at this point.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I am voting for Trump. I can't see. I just literally can't see a way around it. It just is what it is.
At a certain point, though, just being right-wing politically wasn't enough anymore. To own the libs, many anti-SJWs followed Jordan Peterson's lead and bought into his cultural Christianity. Belief in belief. So let's have a look at some of Rubin's guests that have parroted this view.
Washington said it in his famous inaugural address, or his farewell address, I should say, where I'm paraphrasing. He is a fool who thinks that we can have a moral society without religion. That's my point. It's not, it's my opinion, obviously, but I believe it was their opinion too. They understood that human nature is so anarchic that without believing that I am morally responsible to a moral God, the society will fall apart. And I think they're right. This is why I said earlier, I came to God most particularly because I saw the alternative doesn't work. The godless world being created in Western Europe is dissipating. The countries are literally disappearing.
But the great challenge, I think, that has happened, seeing how the rise of atheism is causing also a rise in state power. It is causing a decay in borders and boundaries in nation states. It is causing a moral collapse across society. It is causing a blurring of rational biological categories and empirical methodologies. Why did people believe in God? Did they believe in God because they genuinely believed that loaves could be turned into fishes and water could be turned into wine and people could walk on water? I would say no. I mean, people didn't believe of that. That was a way that they expressed why they found it so important, that it's miraculous. But I think that they believed in religion because it gave a structure of self-restraint that is essential for civilization. And we can talk about this with the book, that you need to restrain your own capacity for violence and dominance and aggression and bullying in order to have rational discussions. So people took shelter in the church. And the atheists came along and they said, that church is terrible. That church is not a valid structure. And they ripped the roof off the church. But it's hailing and there's lightning and people are then exposed to the elements above. Now, okay, rip the roof off the church, but you better build another structure for people to get to.
I think a lot of people don't take the most logically consistent positions with regard to even their own belief systems, with regard to religion, and with regard to how religion mixes with values and defines values. I also don't believe that you have to be a religious person to be a good person. I think acting well is what's more important to me than believing like I believe. I'm always an action-driven person as opposed to a belief-driven person.
Right, so at the individual level, you don't believe that you have to base your beliefs or your morals on Judeo-Christian values, but you think at a societal level that you think we have to, or that we're just doing it?
I do think you have to. I agree with Sam that there's a possibility, I would say a significant possibility, that we live in a meaningless universe where balls of meat with no free will. Right? Like I won't say that that's not a possibility, because I think that is a possibility.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that you cannot build any sort of morality as a society on the basis of that. Here's my real argument with sort of the secular version of the Enlightenment, the French-German version of the Enlightenment, which is that by disconnecting the connection to Judeo-Christian values, the idea was that we were going to untether ourselves, we'd be able to fly to the stars, we can make our own meaning. And I think people suck at making their own meaning, frankly. I think that generally when people make their own meaning, they tend to fall into hedonism or nihilism. I think that
some people can do it, right?
Yeah, for sure. Some people can do it. Some people can do it. Some people can live with this. I mean, I think that Sam seems like a fulfilled guy. Michael Shermer is a fulfilled guy. Right? I think there are people who can live with this and make their own meaning. But for the vast majority of people, the answer is absolutely not. You cannot make your own meaning, because if you make your own meaning, you tend toward either selfishness or meaninglessness. You need to be told that your life has value and that you're in control of your own life, and there needs to be a rooted philosophy to support that.
After talking to his guests, after listening to Dennis Prager, Ben Shapiro and Stefan Molyneux about why our society, or any society for that matter, can't succeed without a Judeo-Christian foundation, Rubin does what he always does. He copies their views and adopts them into his own thinking. So after hearing these guys talk about religion and Judeo-Christian ethics, Rubin now sounds like this.
As I've sat down with believers and non-believers alike, I've genuinely found, well, I guess sort of this would get to what you were saying, John. I've genuinely found the believers not only more welcoming, so like in a situation like this, but more open, actually happier, less dependent on things outside of themselves, more self-reliant, let's say. What I have found in the conversations that I've had with non-believers and with believers is that at a micro level, you can be a non-believer and be absolutely moral and decent and good and a productive member of society and all of those things, as I believe those couple people that I mentioned are. What I think is becoming the problem, and I think this is really where Jordan Peterson hit on something, is that societies can't organize around that, that it can sort of work for a while. And there's, most of the things that I believe in, and I talk about the individual all the time and why I believe that classical liberalism is the best sort of framework for a political system that we should have. They almost can't exist without that underlying bedrock.
And this, I notice, is something that keeps coming up as you're talking, which is the secular issue. There's nothing to lean on. There's nothing to believe in. There's no objective reality. So, and you mentioned Douglas Murray. So he has this line, which maybe you would fall into too, is that he says he's a Christian atheist or a cultural Christian or something like that. Yeah. Basically saying Christianity is good. It shaped the West. We need it. But I myself cannot believe.
Look, Douglas, I don't know. I've interviewed Douglas a million times. We're very good friends. Yeah. I don't know of a position that Douglas holds that is different than my belief. Right. And if acknowledging, as Douglas is doing in that idea, acknowledging that Judeo-Christian values, and as Ben talks about the balance between Jerusalem and Athens, if acknowledging all of that is what makes the world go, is what gives us the underpinning to free people, well, then I'm a conservative, and that's absolutely
But do you think, like, is it enough to acknowledge, as I think, as like every sensible person I know today does, as you do, as Jordan Peterson does, that you need religion, and you need like a good religion?
Society cannot organize around anything else.
It needs religion.
Simply cannot do it. That doesn't mean that there aren't people, individual people. I know plenty of atheists who are good, moral, decent people. Those ideas cannot organize societies. They simply cannot. The idea that you can mindfully meditate the way to a good society simply does not work.
And then I go into this a bit in the book, but your dad did move me on the importance of biblical stories, and that there are truths that have been time-tested truths throughout generations that have kept society together.
So far, we've mapped out his conversion. We've seen in what context it happened, and we've seen all the figures that have influenced him to take this position. But that still doesn't answer why I call him a reactionary, as I do in the title of this video, or why I think his conversion, if we can call it that, is ultimately hollow. A reactionary, as per the Cambridge Dictionary, is a person who is opposed to political or social change or new ideas. By calling Rubin a reactionary, I mean to say that he doesn't really have any strongly held right-wing political views, but that he just takes whatever position is anti-left. A quote from an article in Jacobin magazine perfectly encapsulates this view. Quote, "Rubin is what I've called a postmodern conservative. Neither a classical liberal, nor a libertarian or nationalist, but rather a partisan of whatever ideas seem inimical to the left." This, in short, is why Rubin switched his position on religion. It has nothing to do with a newfound respect for church history, Judeo-Christian theology, or a sincere religious experience or conversion. It's completely reactionary. It's empty. It's hollow. It's not about religion at all. It's all about the culture wars and taking any position that is essentially anti-left. Let's see how Rubin answers the question on why he converted, and see if you can pick up why I think his conversion is reactionary.
One of the reasons we're seeing such chaos out of the left is that secularism run rampant. It gives you what the left is. It gives you people with a completely competing set of ideas, often that have nothing to do with reality, just based on how they feel at any moment. And the reason they're constantly destroying each other is because, well, okay, I feel $15 minimum wage is right, so I'm morally good. Then the next person comes and says the $20 thing, and then they're morally good. Now you got to cut them down, and there's a million versions of this we could go through. The real reason that I came around to this which I know is very much in line with what you believe, and it's very much certainly in line with what Jordan believes. And when we live in a time right now where postmodernism is so hot, and the ideas, the time-tested bad ideas of the past, of socialism and communism, somehow are becoming cool again, it seems to me that the secular world has no way of countering it. That's why liberalism has been decimated by the progressives. I really do believe this is a crisis of meaning, which, by the way, I mean, I write about this in the book. This is one of the things that brought me back to being more of a believer, by the way, because, you know, they talk about the God-shaped hole. These people, the Bernie crew that thinks government can do everything, it's because they believe man can do everything. And I don't think man can do everything. And by the way, man didn't make me free. I was born free as the birthright of being a human being. There is something before us. Why did the founders talk about God-given rights? The state did not make you free. God made you free. Now, we can debate all day long about what that means and what God means and the rest of it. But they are endlessly trying to fill a hole through outrage, through the next craziness of the day, you know, through any of those things, because they don't have real meaning. And that is the huge problem.
That the reason that the secular world feels so out of control right now, I mean, just yesterday, I'm sure some of you guys saw this, CNN did this equality town hall last night, and it was like, you know, everyone has to mention their gender pronouns, and you have to admit that there are more than two genders, and all of these things that we know these conversations are not being had. There are settled science debates that went on for a long time that we know what facts are. And yet we find, because this has now become untethered to anything other than how you feel, that now everything is up for grabs. And that's why it sort of feels like that there's something sort of godless happening here, or something like that.
Rubin clearly hasn't made a genuine conversion or has any kind of traditional belief. His shift is entirely political. Whenever someone asks him about his conversion or his views on religion, he goes on a rant about Bernie, crazy SJWs, 72 genders, or the postmodern Marxist lefties. Christianity is just another tool against the Marxist socialist left in the culture wars, to people like Rubin. He is a true partisan to whatever ideas seem inimical to the left. So this is where we're at right now. Rubin casually does a complete 180 on his religious views, just to be consistently anti-left and to keep up with his religious and cultural Christian buddies. But just to be absolutely certain, to be absolutely sure that I am not either misrepresenting Dave or that I might be flat out wrong about the shallowness of his conversion, I have one last clip that proves, once and for all, that when it comes to religion, he has nothing to say and will instantly shift the conversation to something he does know and want to talk about, that the big bad lefties are coming for you. Remember, the question he is asked here is about the importance of the cross.
I don't know where the question of the cross sits with you, but
well, I'll address the first.
That's a really powerful idea.
So I think the best way I can address that is the forgiveness part first. So my friend Peter Boghossian, who I've had on the show, this is a man who is a liberal, a good liberal in the truest sense of liberal, a professor at Portland State University. He wrote a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists. So this is a guy you would have a lot of existential issues with, but he's been an incredible voice to shine a microscope on what has happened with leftism and what he describes it as. And this is an atheist, so remember, this is an atheist. He describes it as a secular religion with no redemption narrative.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting to me, because here's a guy who's an atheist, right? So he wants things to be ordered purely by secularism and non-belief. And yet, through talking about this, he has learned that religion, virtually all religions, I don't know the one that doesn't really, religions have a redemption narrative. Leftism, or what this postmodern lunacy is, there's no redemption narrative. You, as a Christian white man, you are the bad guy, and you must bow forever. And they'll tolerate you as long as you bow. But the second you won't bow, you're out. Now, that's a religious idea, the idea of forgiving people for that. And the idea that you are not born guilty is really interesting. But they've created that. Well, you were born white and male. You are bad. That is deeply dangerous. So I don't know that completely addresses your question about the cross, but what I would say is that it's become increasingly clear to me from everyone that I talk to and from my own journey that without these ideas, we've got almost no chance right now.
You're right, Dave. This doesn't answer or even address the question of the cross. This clip was posted on the YouTube channel of former Deputy Minister and conservative Australian politician John Anderson, and even his audience didn't get what Rubin was talking about. Just have a look at these comments. I'll single out this one, because it perfectly sums up this entire video, and also Rubin's conversion in a single sentence. John asked him about the cross, yet all Dave Rubin could do is make it about the lefties hating white people. It perfectly shows his religious illiteracy, his reactionary mind, and the emptiness of his supposed conversion. But before I wrap up this video, I wanted to explore one more issue related to Dave's religious views, which shows, again, that he hasn't thought any of this through at all. If you've ever seen a Rubin Report episode, you'll notice that Dave likes to talk about individualism a lot.
But when you mean the individual, like being an individual is the only way to be happy, what do you mean by that?
That's it. All we can do is judge people as individuals, and you have to just figure out what is right for you. I firmly believe in individual liberty more than anything else, and that you have to live the life you want for yourself. That's the best way for humans to prosper.
And that he hates identity politics.
I hate identity politics, if that's where you're going to go. Yeah, I do hate identity politics, because identity politics is what takes away your capacity as an individual to think. Identity politics is what groups us.
So Dave is a true individualist who is convinced that only you can decide how to live your life. You don't need government or anyone else to tell you how to live. Groupthink comes in the way of individual freedom. But doesn't an embrace of a collective Judeo-Christian ethic clash with this view? Christianity is all about the community and the collective. How can Dave continue to claim to be an individualist when he simultaneously holds on to the idea that society collectively needs the identity-driven Judeo-Christian ethic? I really can't see how those two concepts go together. I honestly don't know how to make sense of it. Maybe Dave can help me out.
You know what? If you let someone talk, usually you'll watch them put the noose around their neck and hang themselves, which I may have done here today.